All right. Well, welcome to Higher Education, the podcast that explores career development in public education. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Sergo. And in each episode, we tend to explore a topic, different aspects of career development. We interview experts and we share practical advice. Today, we'll be exploring self awareness and regulating emotions at work. And I'm excited to walk you through the topic. In our sort of dynamic and ever changing public education landscape, dealing with stress and managing our own emotions is a real challenge that we all have to be prepared to confront. In a field like ours, in education, where you are confronted with lots of different stimuli and perspectives and personalities coming at you, it can be an emotionally and mentally charged environment at times. And so, mastering the skills of self regulation, self awareness at work is really important because it'll help us maintain professionalism, foster positive relationships, and ultimately support student success. Without these kinds of skills, stress can really mount and communication can break down. And so we want to really talk about all the different ways that we can really achieve our mission of showing up as our best selves at work. So, to guide us through this subject, I've invited two guests to the show today. First, we have Dr. Keith Harris, our Chief of Equity and Organizational Development. Dr. Harris has a long and distinguished career in FCPS. First, he started out as a special education teacher, and then he moved on to an administrative role. Later in his career, he's worked as a leadership development specialist and a director of schools. And currently, as chief, he oversees our equity team and our organizational development team, including all of the work we do with professional learning and leadership development. We also have invited Anne Workmeister to join us today. Anne has been with FCPS for more than 8 years and has held a variety of positions supporting the emotional well-being of our students. She's currently one of our teacher specialists in student services. She's also worked as a school counselor and a behavior support specialist during her time here in FCPS. And prior to her time in FCPS, she was a teacher, an assistant principal, and a principal. Anne is also a licensed therapist. So it's clear that both Anne and Dr. Harris have a lot of expertise and perspective to bring to our conversation today. So before we dive into our topic, I'd love to have our guests introduce themselves and share their fast facts. So Dr. Harris, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your perspective on today's topic of self-awareness and regulating emotions at work?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Sergo. And I am glad to be here today with Anne Workmeister to talk about these very important topics. Again, I'm Keith Harris, Chief of Equity and Organizational Development. And, my educational background is primarily in education and leadership. And so I do want to say right out front that I'm not a therapist, a psychologist, or a counselor. So the perspective that I bring this morning to the Leveling Up podcast is really as a leader and a servant of people with close to 35 years experience, not only through my varied leadership experiences here in FCPS, but also in my work outside of the school system that really helps me to lens my work within the school system. So, in addition to some of my educational background, I do have a master's in theology that supports my role outside of education as a ministry leader. And so I've been in ministry and pastoral and other leadership roles for a while. I serve in the community as chair for the Board of United Way of Frederick County. And this role allows me to really be sensitive to the varying needs of people in our community that's experiencing education, health, or financial types of challenges. Just another part of my background, more specifically for these two topics today, I am a certified coach. Coaching being that process that really helps people improve their performance and develop their potential. And in addition to being a coach, I'm also trained in helping people to resolve conflicts as a certified conflict resolution and mediation person who works in that areas as well. And so all of these backgrounds just sort of help me lens the experiences that I bring to the conversation today. And again, I'm glad to be with Anne and to share with the viewing audience, just to give a diverse perspective on this topic. So thank you so much for inviting me here today, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
That's wonderful. Yes, thank you. I'm excited to dive into this topic with you because you do have such a well-rounded experience. So, was a great segue. Anne, I'd love to have you introduce yourself and unlock your fast facts about your experiences and your thoughts on this topic as we begin.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to talk today about one of my very favorite topics, and that is the topic of self-regulation and self-awareness. Early on in my career as a teacher, I started out as a high school English teacher, and back in that day, to become a high school teacher in North Carolina, which is where I started, you just needed the academic discipline, like a full major in the academic discipline. So I entered the classroom with one semester of an internship and a lot of Shakespeare. And I realized very early on, I needed some more tools in my toolbox. My students, through with their behavior, sometimes with their learning challenges, I found that I was getting frustrated. I didn't know how to manage my classroom, and that was mainly because I didn't know how to manage myself. So the learning how to stay calm in situations has always been an interest of mine. I went on to get a master's in school counseling and then licensure as a therapist. And my work as a behavior support specialist, that work is not only with students, but also with staff. At my former school, Waverly, we implemented mindfulness with our staff. I had a Tranquil Tuesday where we had a meditation before school started. And what we found is that when teachers start their day calm, that tends to carry on throughout the day. Self-regulation, self-awareness is important because it keeps us calm and we're able to make better decisions. We know through research that when we're dysregulated, when we're burned out, when we're stressed out, when we're tired, we don't problem solve as well. Our brains aren't available to problem solve. And then also, we're more likely to act on our bias. So this is a topic I'm really passionate about. I present on a lot, and especially that intersection of self-regulation and self-care.
Well, it's clear that we have two of the right people to join us in this conversation, and I'm really looking forward to having you share even more of your perspective. So, welcome to both of you, and thank you for introducing yourselves to our audience. So, let's start by sort of making sure we all have the same understanding of what we mean by self regulation and self awareness. So, when we say self awareness, we're really talking about the insight that we have into our own selves and sort of what emotions we're experiencing and what might trigger certain emotions. And so, self awareness in our conversation really means this idea of recognizing your own emotions, thoughts, and behaviors, and the way that those emotions might impact other people. And so, it's really about being in tune with yourself, both the positive and negative emotions that we all experience, which are part of the human experience, but understanding what might trigger us and what our behaviors. Sometimes we notice the behavior before the feeling and what that might mean in terms of tuning into that particular feeling that we're having and the thoughts and reactions that come with it. Emotional regulation, on the other hand, focuses sort of on the response or the reaction to that self-awareness. So what happens when you are feeling a certain emotion? And so emotional regulation means the ability to manage the emotion you're experiencing, managing anger, managing being upset, managing disappointment, also managing joy, all the different things. You know, we have to always make choices about the way we demonstrate those feelings. And so usually when we talk about self-regulation, we talk about the ability to sort of keep certain perhaps non-preferred emotional reactions in the work environment at bay, right? We all know that there's certain reactions that are appropriate for the work environment and certain ones that are not. And emotional regulation is sort of that moderation of that and really checking in on that. So let's start our conversation together by drilling into that self-awareness, that first piece, and making sure that you think about how do we identify the emotions. One of the tools that you'll find in our quick bites is the emotion wheel. And it sort of talks about sort of this idea of what's the word that I might want to use to describe how I'm feeling. And so, we're always trying to give our employees tools and ways to tune into their feelings, to give words to those feelings, to bring awareness to our own selves. So I'd love to start with you, Anne. What are some ideas about how you can help bring the tools for our employees, for your colleagues around self-awareness at work?
Well, I really love the feelings wheel because I think that can help people really nuance the conversation about feelings and really drill down to identify the specific way that they're feeling at any given time. I think that it's important to just take a minute when you're starting to feel those signs that maybe you might be getting dysregulated, and we all show that in different ways. So it's very individual, but it's noticing the changes in you. For me, for example, my heart might start to beat more rapidly. That definitely happens to me. I might sometimes I might feel like, my stomach's a little upset. Those are signs that I'm starting to get dysregulated. I'm starting to get anxious. So that's the time, if you can catch that early, to implement the tools that the team has provided for you. One tool I like to do at that time is just to take a simple breath, and that I do that to pause and then to discern what emotion I'm feeling. So that would look like, okay, starting to feel a certain way, just going to pause for just a minute, take that breath nice and slowly. I like to put my hand on my chest to feel my chest rise. That brings me into my body. It brings me into the present. It connects me to my breath. And then ask yourself, what do I feel? What do I need? What do I feel? What do I need? And oftentimes, just taking a few breaths can help you just slow down, and it actually tricks the body into leaving that fight or flight. Because if we can slow that heart rate down, slow that thinking down, the body sometimes will follow. There are grounding. I like to, when I teach it to students, I like to call them hacks, but there are grounding hacks you can do to bring yourself back into the present. Because oftentimes when we are dysregulated, we're moving into the future, we're moving into anxiety and all the what ifs. Or sometimes we might be having that past over our shoulder, like, oh, see, you messed that up last week, you're going to mess it up again. But grounding into the present really is the state of more perfect mental health. And there are several ways you can do that. One is to do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5 things you can see around you. And that brings you into your environment rather than being like out into the future with worry and fear. So you would say 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch. I like that one because our fingertips have they have a lot of nerves, and sometimes just that sensory is enough to bring us back and to slow down that dysregulation. 2 things you can smell. And I've seen 1 thing you can taste. You might not be able to do that in school. So another variation of that is maybe something you love or something that you're grateful for, and ending it on that. Another way to ground yourself is take a sip. I have cold water. Take a sip of cold water and really think about that. It's also a mindfulness tool. Think about what that feels like. Hold a warm mug and think about the heat going into your hand. Some people will even maybe hold an ice cube and think about how that cold feels, and that brings them into the present. So I would just say, really, as part of that self-awareness piece, how am I feeling? What do I need? Coupled with breath work is a way, especially when we're in schools and we may not have a lot of time or a lot of tools around us. Your breath is always with you, so is your heart rate. Work with those things to get yourself regulated.
I mean, those are such wonderful ideas. I felt myself getting calmer as I really thought and listened to you. And, I think it's one of the gifts that we've given ourselves and our children. I see this in my own children are the words and the labels to describe feelings. I have a child, as many do, who are into competitive sports and, was feeling anxious. And she says to me, I just need to slow down and take a few deep breaths. I'm feeling anxious. And I was, just so delighted in some, not with her struggle, but with her, being able to identify those feelings. And so I loved how you talked about just checking in with yourself. And, some people journal, some people, do, have mood apps, and every day you sort of indicate your mood. And I always say, give voice to the feeling. And you talked about that. How do you give voice to the feeling? I want to then sort of go over to you, Dr. Harris, to talk a little bit more about the other part of this, which is you've checked in with yourself, you know what the feeling is, and now you have got to make some choices about how to regulate your emotions, your reaction. And I want to emphasize that emotional regulation is never intended to say suppress your emotions. But in, acknowledging your feelings, you have to situate them to the context you're at, right? And the work environment and the standards of professional practice and all of those things. And so we have to be productive. We have to have those boundaries, but also, we aren't going to just pretend that we aren't upset or not feel frustrated in the circumstance. So, Dr. Harris, as you're thinking about, what advice you might coach or counsel others, what are some tools that you suggest people do to try to check in on or manage their emotions at work?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And Anne, I really love some of the techniques that you gave to really regulate what you might be experiencing in the moment. And one of the things that I also do through coaching, but then also for myself, is just to sort of ground myself in my environment. Um, I really just have folks, and I have something on my in my area usually as well, that brings me peace, calm, and serenity. That when I think about that object or I focus on that picture or something, it really helps me to manage my emotions and just really stay grounded in where I am. I also want to offer just a couple of things, because sometimes when we talk about um, being self-aware and managing our emotions, we think about um, ourselves, and oftentimes we're in conversations with others, and how we show up to those conversations can either elevate or um, de-escalate some of the things that we're going through. And so there are some simple things that we hear all the time that are often heard but practiced so little. And so one of those things is really just this whole thing of active listening. And we hear that thing so often, but yet true active listening, we really don't pay enough attention to. And so when we talk about active listening, is not only involving hearing the words that come from another person's mouth, but also in the space of developing your own self awareness, is also hearing what's being said through silence, what's being said through, and being comfortable with the silence. It also is being aware of the tone of the other person's voice, the tone of your voice, looking at body language, and really the energy that is being present in the room. Also, when I think about managing, being aware of my own emotions, and when I'm speaking with other people, it also is about really staying in tune with and checking in with the underlying assumptions and beliefs that you bring into the situation and that another person brings into the situation or conversation, and really think about the motivations that you bring or another person brings and the commitments. And so, I bring that up because when we actively listen to our colleagues and others, self awareness can be developed not only for the hearer, but then also for the speaker as well. So I also, let me offer this second thing as well that's coming up for me right now. And one of the things that we have provided some professional learning on for our system administrators is perspective taking. And so when we talk about perspective taking, it refers to that process of really imagining another person's thoughts and feelings from that other person's point of view. Because oftentimes our reaction, our emotional response, those things is based on what we think and not actually based on a full understanding of the situation or the perspective that's sort of being brought to us. And so it's that perspective taking is really about gaining um, understanding, helping us to understand a meaning behind the situation, the meaning that it holds for the other person, and then making sure that we adjust to the needs of that other person. So I wanted to bring that piece up as well because people respond positively to being understood, and using our perspectives not only fosters a greater understanding, but it also builds social bonds. And those social bonds not only helps the other person, but it also helps yourself as well. So I wanted to bring that those pieces up to the conversation.
Yeah, that's such an important, what you said reminds me of this idea of holding space for people. I think we as leaders, as educators, we're problem solvers. So we often feel like when someone brings high emotion or frustration or anxiety or challenge to us, we're supposed to fix it for them. And I think one of the things that's hard to learn as a leader and even as a colleague is that sometimes all people need you to do is sort of hold that space for them. I've been talking with my own children about this, and so now, my children will bring me a problem, and my daughter will always say to me, "Now don't do anything about this," like, it's like, well, I'm not going to. And I said, I'm just going to hold some space for you so you can tell me what you need to. If you need me to help you, I want you to tell me what you need, but otherwise I'm happy to listen. And I think that that's really an important key. So, Anne, I'd love to shift over to you for a little bit. You've worked as a BCBA or a board certified behavior analyst and support staff, and I'm sure you have a ton of tools in your toolkit around emotional regulation. Do you have some tips that might be helpful for our staff members to try to utilize to build on some of what Dr. Harris shared?
Sure. I think it's really important for people to come up with an individual plan that is intentional. What works for me may not work for you. And the best tip for self-care is to be intentional. It can't just happen. Um, for example, something that a lot of people find helpful is going outside in nature. They call green time. Going outside, even just for a few minutes in your workday, can be a complete reset. You get a fresh perspective, and research shows that spending a little time outdoors increases your focus. It can decrease your stress. It can also improve gratitude. So being intentional about what you're doing with your time, instead of scrolling during your lunch break, connect with a colleague. These are preventative measures, or do something that feels good. Take a walk. For example, in the summer when we work at central office, we work those really long days. That can be a struggle, and it can feel very stressful to me. So I have a walking buddy at central office, and we take a walk during our lunch break for that time, and that completely resets me, and I feel fresh and calm when I return. I think that tapping out is also needs to be normalized. And what I mean by that is if as a teacher, an instructional assistant, anyone in our system, it's okay to not be okay. And I think part of building trust on a school team is being able to say, I'm not okay and I need a break. And discussing that with the team and how we can support one another, maybe when we're having a rough day. Um, I think that should be normalized more, and I think that is a great self-care tool. And probably the best self-care tool out there are having boundaries. Um, boundaries, how we use our time, and how we expend our energy. For me, I found that going to like eating with people maybe who are complaining about the workplace, while I want to be there for them, that stressed me out. and it added to my stress and dysregulation. So I don't do that. I don't do that. And I try to, again, be really intentional and do things that for me are positive and that help me stay regulated. In the moment, that breath work and that grounding, those are the tickets. That's the ticket to, I think, staying calm. But okay, they need to edit that.
I know, and I think one of the things that you share though that I want to speak to and build upon is this idea that we're not perfect. And so part of what I hear in both of your sort of offerings is that there are times where you're going to take a misstep. You're going to let your emotions get the best of you. And one of the things that I always have learned, both as a former principal and a director, and of course now as the chief of staff, is that what is so important when that happens is the act of repair. And so, I try to practice this as a parent. I practice this in my personal relationships and in my work relationships. I was in a meeting recently and I was feeling very frustrated about sort of where a particular project was. And while I didn't direct my frustration at any individual person, it was really clear to people in the meeting that I was frustrated. And after the meeting, I circled back and said, what you saw was my frustration. And I want you to know that that's not a reflection on any of your individual contributions. It's a frustration about how long something is taking. And so I think also I want to acknowledge that the act of repair is important with kids, especially. Kids need to see that from the adults in their environment, but with colleagues and with other adults is sort of going back and saying, I don't think I handled this in the way that I wanted, or I let my emotions get the best of me. I want to shift then into this idea of our conversation around a topic that I happen to really be very interested in as a scholar, which is called emotional labor. Emotional labor is a term that was coined by a sociologist named Arlie Rothschild in the early 80s, who wrote a book called The Managed Heart. And it's very specific to the work environment. And so emotional labor is sort of a subset of what we're talking about. And it's this idea of how you have to manage and express your emotions to meet the demands of the job. There's a list, I don't have it memorized, of high emotional labor jobs. Flight attendants come up, customer service and retail come up, but so do educators and nursing staff come up. These are jobs where you have to smile and appear, unmiffed when you are perhaps not receiving that from another person. And there's a lot of really interesting research on emotional labor. And it's basically how you have to show up in a way that's okay for your work environment, even if you don't feel okay. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. And Dr. Harris, I'll start with you this time. What are some of the challenges and potential solutions that you're seeing in your work around sort of how our staff are taxed in this area of emotional labor? And, what do you see in terms of some of the observations and probably maybe solutions that people should consider if they feel like this is an area of tension for them?
Wow, that emotional labor piece is so important. And so part of the work that I deal with is regarding hate, bias, discrimination, supporting those who've been impacted by all of those things. And in this work, there's a whole lot of emotions that can surface and just sort of pile on, because when you hear about things that are egregious or are the victim of it, your emotions can get the best of you if you're not really self-aware of all of those things, and things can really pile up with all of those things. And also, if you are a staff member from a historically marginalized group, you could be dealing with the very same things that you yourself have been victimized by or may be experiencing, and all of those things that just sort of adds on to that pile of weight. And so for me, one of the things that I do several things, but it is so important for me during the workday as well as beyond the workday to have a support system. I think that you have to have at least somebody with whom you can close the door, you can let your frustrations out, and then you can sort of get back on track and take things in perspective, get up and do it all over again. Um, and that one somebody, when you're in what I will call the mud hole of emotional weights, you don't need somebody who's going to get into the mud hole and stay stuck there with you, but someone who will get into that mud hole, but also have an anchor to be able and enough emotional support and stability themselves in the moment to be able to help to get you out so that you can continue to move on. So that support system is so, so key. Then I cannot minimize some of the things that Ann was saying earlier to really get rid of that weight. There are tools that we have readily available to us that some staff don't take full advantage of. And so let me talk about this whole thing of work-life balance. And so you will hear staff say, well, I don't have time, I don't have time. Well, if you're school-based, you do have a planning time, and you do have a lunch period, and oftentimes you can take a break. And so it's not that you don't have those things, but it's how are you using those things to be able to unload before you go into that next subject or that next area. Um, and then also, for me, in order to get, because you don't have those scheduled times in central office per se, but you have to purpose and be intentional about taking some of those times. And for me, that comes through managing, my calendar and putting in times for lunch and putting in time for break. I have this saying when someone tells me, I don't have time and all of those things, and I sort of process their day. One of the things that I say to them as a parting thing is, um, either you can control your schedule and your calendar, or everybody else will. So which way will you have it? And so taking advantage of the times that you do have will be important. And then it's just the basic things for me. It comes in the form of listening to music to sort of unpack. And even when I go home, I try to unload before I get into the next part of my day. And so that means for me getting away for 20 to 30 minutes by myself, to really get rid of some of that emotional weight and all of those things. So that's just some of the things that's sort of coming up for me as we talk about this.
Yeah, those are some great ideas, sort of, again, checking in with a peer, giving yourself some space to sort of process your emotions, unpack them, and reset them yourself. And what would you add to that in terms of how you might help staff balance their emotions while also managing sort of the emotional labor of their role?
Sure. When I read about emotional labor, what really comes into my mind, especially in my roles with supporting students with a lot of behavioral needs, is that the term co-regulation. And I think that that term can apply even with our interactions with staff. And as humans, it's all brain based, but as humans, we have mirror neurons, which means we tend to want to match the energy of the other person. So if there is a student who is extremely dysregulated, we have to be intentional and work really hard to keep our brains calm. And so co-regulation happens when our calm meets their storm. Our brain's natural tendency is their storm brings another storm in us. But it's when our calm meets their storm. How do we do that? How do we do that? I did that a lot with students without using words. I did that non-verbally by modeling breath work, by modeling just a calm body, calm face, and having the awareness of what that looks like. Often with our colleagues, with our students, our bodies and our faces, they say a lot more than our words do about what kind of emotional state we're in. So we have to be aware of those things too. But when my students would start to escalate and become dysregulated, oftentimes I would just breathe with me. let's have a seat. And the same with colleagues. And then and Dr. Sergo, like you said, holding space for someone is one of the most therapeutic things you can do for another human. You don't have to fix their problems. Just sitting with someone when they're not okay is so powerful and is so therapeutic and healing. But I try when I'm working with students to think, okay, it's my job. And I even sometimes have the visual metaphor. It's my job to help calm their storm. And so to try to give them some of that from me. And the same with colleagues. We've all had, a colleague who maybe comes in angry or frustrated one day. And oftentimes when they approach you, it may not even have anything to do with what actually is going on at work. And like Dr. Harris pointed out earlier, we all have different perspectives, different things could be going on that we're not aware of. But just acknowledging to that colleague, sounds like you're having a hard time. I'm here to listen. And keeping your calm and being open to them, I think is a way, is just a way to stay focused on the people and stay focused in the environment without letting other people pull your regulation away.
Yeah, such good advice about sort of, again, checking in with yourself, looking at how you're interacting with others, and then utilizing some of those great strategies. So as we get to sort of toward our closure, we have a question from one of our employees, and this person is a support staff member, and I'd love to get your sort of quick thoughts on how you would respond to their question. So that it says, as an instructional assistant, I often find myself feeling overwhelmed when managing challenging student behaviors. What are some strategies I can use to keep myself calm as the adult and regulate my emotions in these high stress situations? I want to respond effectively and maintain a positive learning environment, but it's feeling really hard for me to do so. And I'll start with you this time, and then we'll move over to Dr. Harris. What advice would you give this particular employee?
Well, before I give any advice, I would really like to acknowledge that it is hard. That work is really hard, and I appreciate the work that our all of our staff are doing with our students. I am in schools, and I know that student behaviors are a concern, and I just want to express my gratitude to them for doing that work. I would say that in the moment, what you are modeling calm and staying calm, and again, tapping out if you feel yourself starting to get dysregulated, those are great strategies. But self-regulation really starts with you, and it starts at home with really good self-care. And I know self-care has gotten a bad name, but what self-care is the intentional activity you do to keep yourself at baseline, to stay happy, to keep yourself grounded in the present. What a lot of people practice, especially those of us who are in really stressful jobs, is we practice aftercare. Aftercare is mindlessly scrolling. It's watching Netflix so much that lady comes on and says, "Are you still watching? Yes or no?" That is aftercare. That is not replenishing what you need. That is disassociation and disconnecting. Now, sometimes we all do that, and it's okay. But to come to work ready and energized and to develop a protective factor, staff need to have ongoing intentional self-care, doing what brings you joy, what fuels you. And that's different for everybody. For me, I need some outdoor time. And if I've done that the night before, if I've done some breath work in the morning, and I don't mean half an hour, I mean 2 or 3 minutes. If I've said my mantra, then that is a protective factor that stays with me through the day. And that's what I would suggest. And then just also, if you do get dysregulated, and Dr. Sergo, you mentioned this, it doesn't mean that you're a flawed person, or that I've had people say, "I'm really bad at self-care, I'm really impatient." No, you just haven't figured it out yet, what works for you yet. So with self-compassion, look at what you've done, just acknowledge how you feel, and then make adjustments. Okay. And no, I didn't say acknowledge how you feel and judge yourself. Acknowledge how you feel, understand you did the best you could at the time, and then really think about that question, what do I need right now?
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think you bring up this really important point, which is so the employee should be commended for recognizing I am struggling as the adult to show up calm in a non-calm environment, and it reminds me of when I was raising my children when they were young, and struggling with sort of the age appropriate sort of kid tantrums, and my pediatrician said, just sit down calmly, don't engage, don't look them in the eye, that you elevating does not de-escalate the situation. And so all of those de-escalation strategies, holding space, not trying to fix things through words, through appeal, or convincing students to get themselves regulated, that being a calm anchor is essential. Dr. Harris, anything you would add to those suggestions?
Yeah, so in addition to what Anne shared, in the moment, one of the things that we have to continually tell ourselves is this student's behavior is not about you. The student most times is just working through something that is happening. They're working through some other trigger, and it manifests on you because you're the one that's working with the student in the moment. But you have to keep telling yourself, this is not about me. In other words, don't personalize the student's behavior. Because again, oftentimes it's what the student is going through, and you are helping the student through the moment. Just to reinforce some of the other things that we've shared through our time together, deep breaths in the moment, because that's going to help you to regulate your emotions and reactions. And then also being comfortable with not saying anything in the moment. You don't have to speak at every moment through the crisis. And so
Mm.
sometimes saying nothing and just being present for the student is best sometimes. So I'd add that to what's already been shared.
Yeah, such important. It's so hard to do, right? So hard for us to do as adults that we don't. This isn't about convincing a student to make a better choice or make a different choice. It's just about holding that space, and that there are unintended and unfortunate consequences if we can't do that and show up that way. So I think sometimes many of our employees, particularly those who work with challenging student behaviors, feel that the student's own dysregulation is somehow a reflection on them, that their student is dysregulated because of something they're not doing right. And while that can be true, adults can certainly cause triggers or create triggers in children. Also, to know that the most important thing is to just show up calm and not escalate a situation any more than it already is. Well, unfortunately, this brings us to the end of our show today. I could talk about this topic for a great length, and we're going to have a part 2 in November. And so if this topic is one that really interests you, come back and check it out. We'll be continuing this conversation with some additional guests as we really go deeper, because certainly this is one of the biggest bodies of focus and work for us as we focus on employee health and well-being. Self-awareness and emotional regulation are 2 skills that are important in work and in life. And I'm so excited and pleased with both of you as experts in sharing your perspective today. So as a closing comment, I'd love to ask for each of you to give one last word, short, quick sentence. If you could offer one piece of advice to someone who is trying to level up in their field or position with a focus on emotional regulation and self-awareness, what would you say is the sort of a ticket to leave piece of advice? And this time I'll have you go first, Dr. Harris.
Okay, so first of all, Dr. Sergo, thank you so much for bringing this topic to the surface for our employees. And thank you so much, Anne, for your perspectives and expertise in lensing this work. So, really, I just will say to the audience, just recognize that no matter your position, your role within the school system, you are a leader who has an opportunity to make a difference. in the lives of our students and other staff and the community in which we serve. And so you do make a difference, and we do appreciate each and everything that you do every single day for our school system. So thank you so much for allowing me to be here today.
All right. Thank you so much. And Anne, I'll give you the last word.
Okay, thank you for having me, Dr. Sergo, and thank you so much for bringing this topic to light. I'm always happy to go to schools and do mindfulness PLs. I love that. And Dr. Harris, it's always nice to converse with you. My advice would be just for staff to engage in ongoing and continuous reflection without judgment about how they're feeling and what they need. Also with the caveat, sometimes in our field, we cannot meditate away what's going on. And if you're trying and you are still not able to feel regulated and to feel refreshed every day, please don't hesitate to reach out to get help for that. We have an EAP program that can connect you with a therapist, and our insurance is wonderful for providing therapy. So I think normalizing those conversations also about our mental health are just really important, because the work we do is hard and it's important. The employees really matter, and I think it's important for them to be okay and healthy and the best versions of themselves.
And I love that, right? It's okay to not be okay. And it's also okay to know that we have to still show up as our best selves, because our kids and our colleagues are counting on us. So thank you both for your expertise and your insights. And that wraps up today's episode of Leveling Up. We hope that you found our exploration of self-regulation and emotional self-awareness and emotional regulation informative. Maybe you walked away, I hope, with a few strategies as I have to add to your tool belt. Until next time, please don't forget to check out our Quick Bites on our career development website at fcps.org/HR/career development, and see us next month to check out our newest podcast in this series. Take care. Thank you so much.